We are extending, upon request of you guys, and also just for what we saw in office hours, homework 3 will be due tomorrow night at 11:59 p.m. So if you haven't finished, please take this extra time to get looking at it. And also, me and Ethan there's going to be extended office hours tomorrow. So, by the way, the final notice for if you want to know what times office hours are, always check the form. The form will have the most recent data, and it's hard to keep everything else updated. But me and Ethan will be hosting office hours from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. in So Do I Coffee Shop, which is next to Cheese and Stuff, underneath or right next to Unit 3. I'll also be holding office hours in Eshelman, 8 to 10 p.m. And I think you might be able to check online, and you'll see a couple more. Make sure to fill out the request form so we know who's coming, and we can kind of load balance and get more TAs if we need to. But please, 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 if you're having trouble on the homework, reach out to us, use these resources, post on Discourse, and yeah, hopefully 1 day of extension will be fine. If you guys feel like 1 day isn't enough, that's fine. We have slip days in this course. So slip days, I believe we have 3 or 4, generally speaking, and we have a pretty standard kind of late day policy in some sense. It's not meant to destroy your grade or make you fail the class, but generally speaking, it's help in the case you have a lot of projects this week or stuff like that, feel free. But if really can't turn in by tomorrow, that's fine. That's why we kind of have some built-in leeway into the system. Any questions on homework, office hours, anything like that? Awesome. Great. So Ethan will kick us off with a demo on events. And pay close attention to this demo, because part of the project will be answering some questions about this demo. And we'll be giving you the code, and hopefully as well, last week's webcast didn't work, so we'll be trying again. And we'll be giving you a video of this demo so you guys can refer back to it. By the way, did you clear the screen? Okay, cool. Great.
Alrighty, so I'm just going to go through kind of a recap of the event listener functions that we talked about and introduced last lecture. We've kind of identified a few common problems that people are seeing when applying event listeners to the project that's out right now. So I want to kind of clear some of that confusion with a demo today that will be an emoji dictionary. Okay? So the goal of this little demo is that we'll have some emoji on the screen. And when you click on the emoji, it'll show the name of the emoji and some tags that are related to the emoji. Okay, so maybe it would be helpful if I actually show what the end result is. The goal is something like this, where we have some emoji here, and you click, and then it's it has some information about the emoji. It's pretty simple, but we're going to kind of talk through the event listeners that are set up for this. Sound good? Okay, perfect. So the first thing here is, let's take a look at the code. This is kind of a very simple React app so far. All we have rendered here is just a heading 1 that has a waving emoji. Okay. So what is kind of the first step if I want to apply some action to this, supply some click action to this emoji? What prop do I need to pass in? What is that called? Ideas? What prop do I need to pass in? What is the prop that takes in a function and performs something when I click on an object? What is that called? Yeah. I heard it somewhere. It's onClick. Okay? So onClick is the function that we use to pass into any kind of HTML element in our React that allows us to perform some action when we click on the element. So let's go ahead and try that, right? First, I'll define a function called handleClick. Okay, can everyone see this? This is a function called handleClick, and right now, I'm just going to make this handleClick function alert hello. Okay, that's all. That's all we want to do with this handleClick right now, just to see if it'll work. Okay, and what I'll do here is I'll pass in handleClick into this heading, so that when I click on this heading, I want it to actually say hello. Okay, so I'm going to pass in the function. I'm going to call handleClick here. And it alerts hello, right? But when I try to click on it here, it doesn't actually alert anymore, right? So something is happening here where I'm clicking this hand. I set up the event listener on click, but nothing is happening. Can anyone explain to me why this is happening? What's going on here? Any ideas? If not, that's okay. You may have run into this, but yeah.
You have to make it something that, the function has to be something that calls handleClick, but you don't want it to be handleClick, because it will call handleClick when it's generating that H1, and then it does the alert and doesn't do it.
Yeah, great point. So we have to actually pass in a function to the onClick prop, right? So what value is this? Well, when React evaluates this statement, what's going to happen is you are evaluating this bit of JavaScript to pass into the onClick prop. And it's going to actually call handleClick as soon as you write it like this, okay? Because this is just an expression that JavaScript is trying to evaluate. In this case, handleClick doesn't actually return anything. So what you're passing into onClick is undefined. Okay, so when I run this, nothing is happening, right? And we can verify that by going into our React DevTools and inspecting the props, and we can see that we're not actually passing in a function. What would be passing in a function is if we got rid of these parentheses, right? So if we got rid of the parentheses, what I'm now passing in is a function as a value, right? And the reason why this is an important distinction is that React needs something to call when your element is clicked, right? You don't want to invoke the function immediately. You want to allow React to invoke that function for you. So now that I've done that, I can click this, and every time I click it, it's going to say hello. Okay? Sound good? So the next goal here is I want to actually take this handleClick function, and I want to accept an argument that has the emoji that I'm using, right? So for example, I'm gonna use I'm gonna call it emoj. So it's gonna say emoj, and emoj should be like the wave. Like the string wave, okay? So when I click on this wave emoji next, what I want it to say is, hello, I got clicked with, and then a wave emoji, okay? So let's try that. We'll say, hello, I was clicked by emoj, right? So we know I can't do this, right? We know that I'm not able to do this. Oh, there it is. Oops. Let me bring up my emoji selector here. There we go. Okay. So we know I can't do this, and why, right? Why can't I do this again? Well, it's because this is doing exactly the same thing when we were just calling it with parentheses without any arguments, right? So it alerted one time at the beginning, but if I click on this, nothing happens again because this function still returns undefined, right? So let's get rid of it again and see what happens. We'll click on it. But now it says, hello, I was clicked by object, right? Any guesses as to what this object is? If not, that's okay. But we could use the debugger to find out, right? So what we'll do is we'll actually breakpoint this function, and we'll actually try to find out what that object is, like what's going on there. So I'm going to set up a breakpoint in handleClick, and I want to figure out what the value of emoj is. Like what is being passed into emoj if I just send in handleClick to onClick. And it turns out, if I breakpoint this function, and now I click handleClick is called, right? I look at emoj, and what is this? Well, this is actually, you might recognize this, this is an event object, right? This is the event object that contains that information like event.target.value, right? These are places where you can access the coordinates of where I clicked. We talked about this before, right? When we set up event listeners, we can access this first argument that tells us a little bit more about what thing was clicked, how it was clicked. You have some other properties here, like exactly where on the screen they clicked. I have a timestamp here, what kind of event it was, right? So I have an event object that's being passed into here, right? So by default, what's going on is it's alerting, hello, I was clicked by emoj, but emoj is not a string. Emoj is this event object, right? So when we pass in a function to react like onClick equals handleClick, this function handleClick will be called with the event object. Okay? So by default, it's going to be called with the event object. So I can change this behavior to call handleClick with the right argument that I expect, but the way I do this is going to look a little strange. So I'm going to walk you through that syntax now. Okay? Any questions before I continue with that unusual syntax? Any questions about what I've done so far? Event object, handleClick. Okay, let's go ahead and try it. So what I'm going to do now is instead of directly passing in handleClick, I'm actually going to pass in my own anonymous function or unnamed function right into the onClick property. So what does that look like? Well, you may recognize this syntax from last lecture, but if I put in parentheses and then the arrow, this is now a function, right? So this is like a function that accepts no arguments. I could accept arguments by typing in event here, because that's going to be the first argument that this function is called with. And then I can perform any actions that I want right here, right? These curly braces are not necessary if your function only takes up one line, and you want to return immediately. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call handle click, but instead with a very specific parameter, which will be wave, right? And wave here will be the parameter, that will be passed in as emoji. Okay, so the point here is I want it to be a function that calls handle click with the right argument that I expect. Okay, so now when I click this, it says hello, I was clicked by wave, hello, I was clicked by wave. So now this is kind of correct, right? It turns out I didn't need this event object, right? But if I needed to access something about the event before it was passed a handle click, this would be my opportunity to do that. Okay? Yeah, question?
Can you re-explain the whole, like, why you put event there, the event parentheses?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what I've done here is I've defined a function inside of my JavaScript expression here. So this is a valid JavaScript expression. Like if I go into my console, if I go into my console and I type in like let f equals this is valid, okay? You might recognize the syntax because this is the same as saying something like function f equals, let f equals function event return handle click, right? So these two forms are equivalent, right? This is essentially the same as saying this. There's like a subtle nuance to what the difference is, but this is basically defining that function. Does that syntax make sense to everyone? Like what I'm defining here is this expression refers to a function as a value. This function is a value, and that's why I can assign it to something like f. And it's the same as setting up an anonymous function or a function that doesn't have a name. Where's my cursor? Right here, right? Same thing, right? Just without the function keyword. It's a more convenient way of writing functions just inside of JSX. Yeah.
So you can start with function curly braces event, function event, the second part also in your component.
Yeah, good question. So you're asking if I can do something like define function, something like this.
Yeah.
You're asking if I can do this. Yeah, it turns out that I don't know if I've tried. Actually, this may also be okay. So if I can do this, let's try it. Let's try. Yeah, that's also okay. That's also okay. You can define the function in line like this. It turns out like the reason why you want to use that lambda syntax, like the arrow syntax, these are sometimes called arrow functions because they have an arrow instead of using the function keyword. It turns out you want to use this more often for reasons that we're not really going to go into right now. So yeah, there's like a subtle scoping issue that will make you want to use this syntax more often. It's also just like shorter, right? It's a little bit shorter to write this than with the function keyword. So think of it that way. We want to put in less work for you. Any other questions? So again, what I can do here is I can pass in a function. How do I write that function? Well, I can write event and then handle click and then pass in wave like that, right? And because I don't even need this event object here, I can just take it out, right? If I'm not using event, I don't even have to like list it in the parameters. So this is an even shorter way of doing that, right? Does that make sense?
It won't throw you an error because the caller will try to pass in an argument.
Yeah, so in Python you might be familiar with the fact that if you define a lambda function and you don't pass in the right number of parameters, it'll error. In JavaScript, this is not a thing. In JavaScript, like you can pass in as many parameters as you want to a function that takes none of them, and that still works. In JavaScript, you think of parameters as things you name, and if they're not passed in, they are by default undefined. That's how that works. Yeah, it's a little strange, but that's how that works. Yeah.
How will you, if you had event and then instead of handle click with the wave emoji, how would you pass in something for event?
How do I pass in something for event? Yeah, good question. So if I want to pass in a field of event to handle click, is that an example? So let's say I wanted to pass in event.target to handle click. That's something I can receive, right? So I can take in another parameter here called L, and we'll breakpoint again to find out what L is. Oh, I could have just clicked it. All right, so now we look at what L is, and this is the heading 1 element that was the target of that event, right? So that's an example of how I can pass in something from event to the handleClick function. Okay? Sound good? Okay, let's kind of try to move forward here so we can get to the stuff about the higher order component. So what we can do now is instead of actually using handleClick, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this higher order component, kind of like with tweets. This is another higher order component we wrote called with emoji label. With emoji label passes down one function in props called set emoji. And set emoji is what actually allows this to happen, right? So if I pass in an emoji to set emoji, it creates this little box at the bottom, okay? So that's what we're gonna do. So what I'll do here is I'll replace this single h1 with a map over this list of emojis, right, that I have up here. So I can say emoji.map. Oh wait, I should have kept that header so I can use it. So I'll say emoji.map, emoj, and then here's where I'll bring in this JSX expression, right? So now I'm mapping over to create all of these emoji, but instead of wave, I want to pass in what? I want to pass in emoj, so that it's now that list of emoji that I had up here. And instead of handleClick, just passing in this wave string, I want to pass an emoji here as well. Okay? So now that I'm passing that in, I can actually click handleClick, and now it works, except it's still an alert, right? So the only difference that the only thing I need to change here now is I can just call props.setEmoji with emoj, and now I should get this little thing under that has that information. It's a little small, so it's hard to read, but yeah, see that? So what have I done here? Well, for each of these things I'm mapping over, let me close the preview and kind of walk through this code. Okay, so let's walk through this. So we have an array here of emoji. They're strings. So emoj is one of these strings at any point in time. Okay, so for each of those emoji strings, I'm rendering an h1 element that has an onClick prop. That onClick prop is a function that I define for every one of those emoji strings, okay? And what that onClick prop is a function that calls handleClick. With what value? Well, it calls it with the value that it's mapping over at that point. So at one point, this function looks like event handleClick wave emoji. At one point, it looks like handleClick heart emoji, right? So every time this maps over, it's creating a new function that calls handleClick in a very specific way. How do we feel about that? Does that kind of make sense? So I'm creating 5 function values here, right? I'm creating one function value for each of these emoji in this array. And each of those functions differ just by one thing. And that one thing is what the emoji value is inside of that functional frame, okay? The tricky thing here is that it's hard to see because of the arrow function syntax, but this argument to map is actually a function, right? This is just like the function inside of onClick. So I'm passing a function into map where emoj is a different value for each of those functions inside of the map, and then I'm creating a new function within that function that acts as my event listener, right? So that event listener is emoj with like whatever emoji like I'm mapping over at that point, right? So again, 5 functional values, 5 emojis, and that's why the handleClick now accepts different parameters and is able to respond to that appropriately, right? So now when I click this, right, if I actually breakpoint this, we can maybe this is a little bit more clear. Yeah. So I'll breakpoint handleClick again just so you get a sense. If I click this now, you can see that emoj, when I click on that party hat, is the party hat emoji, right? Now I go to this one, and it's the computer. I go to this one, it's the heart, right? So you can see that emoji is changing with each of those emoji that I'm clicking, right? And that's because a different function is called for each one of these emoji elements that I have at the top of the screen, right? There are 5 different functional values there, right, for each emoji. How do we feel about that? Thumbs up, thumbs down, how we feel about that. Somewhere in the middle? Okay, perfect. Any last questions before we get started with lab? Yeah?
Where did the set emoji?
Good question. What is props.setEmoji? Well, props.setEmoji is something that is actually being passed down by our higher order component. The way that got passed is, let me unbreakpoint this. So at the very bottom of this, you can see that I'm creating this value called wrapped app. And wrapped app calls with emoji label over my app component. And that's where set emoji is coming from. That's how this set emoji prop is being passed into the app. So set emoji is a prop that's being passed into app. And where is that being passed by? It's being passed by with emoji label. Okay? So you might not see it in the right prop syntax here, but you kind of have to trust that with emoji label is going to give that to you. And this is kind of a common pattern when you use React libraries that share some logic between your components and ask you to wrap your app like this, right? So if you're ever using higher order components from a different React component library, you're going to see this a lot, okay? Does that make sense? So again, to answer the question, set emoji is a prop that's being passed, okay? Cool. Well, this finished solution is already available to you in your lab document, and that lab document is available on the portal. It's the first part of a project. That is our first project of this course. And yeah, any more announcements before we get started with everything?
We can quickly walk through the project.
Oh, yeah.
The last word I wanted to say on higher order components, just because I noticed that some of you mentioned that you're confused about it, is that the whole idea is that you don't have to worry about how or what set emoji is or does. But just like in set tweets, the idea is you don't need to know what set tweets does. You just need to call it in your code when you want the page to refresh. So every time you're kind of promised by the higher order component that when you call props.setTweets with a query, it'll go get all those queries for you and give you a brand new tweet object. You're not worrying about what the higher order component does and how it does it. You're welcome to look inside, but it's not something we've covered. Instead, you just trust that the prop it gave you was correct and that you just need to call it. So that's the whole idea behind this higher order component thing. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is our project. Sorry about the React DeCal logo being it's better on a wider screen. But this is the project. So you're going to be building kind of a shopping cart where you're able to see a bunch of products on the screen, add them to your cart, and see the total price that comes out at the end. This lab was designed by Selena. She's not here right now, but you'll see her running around. But effectively, this will be a big kind of this is hopefully, or not hopefully, but this is going to be your first dive into starting a React project mostly from scratch. What this means is that you will see, you'll actually be building this on your own computers instead of using Code Sandbox. So in Code Sandbox, you were developing in the browser. Now you'll be using a text editor and developing locally. So this will kind of be a chance to see how that works when you're actually working with React. And over the semester, we'll get a little bit more further into hands-off, starting from complete scratch and so on. You'll be using Git. So hopefully, if you need a refresher on that, feel free to ask questions. But we've included most of the things you need to know. But ultimately, logistics-wise, read the beginning of this. Read all the. Where are we? There we go. Read all the intro stuff. It's very important. There's a good amount of resources we give. Make sure you're familiar with how to work in the project. Hopefully, by the end of this lab, you finish part 0. Part 0 is just installing everything you need and trying to run a command you'll find out is very important, npm start, which starts up what's called your development server, such that every time you edit a file in your text editor and save, the browser will edit automatically. So that's something that we want to get all of you started with today and comfortable working with. So ask lots of questions that you have and any problems that come up. We want to get them hopefully solved by today in the last 20 minutes that we have. And then the last part of part 0 is a review on this demo that we just saw. So you can look into the code there. We'll be working on posting a YouTube video of what just happened. And then you'll be answering a couple different questions about what happened, hopefully understanding it. Feel free to ask us questions on that too. And then after you finish all that, you're welcome to continue on to part 1, which is, it'll be due in a week on Tuesday. It's meant to be homework size, lab size. It's not meant to be too long, but it does involve a little bit more, a little bit less hand-holding, a little bit more kind of applying and redoing all the things that you've been doing over the past couple of weeks. So we encourage you to, again, look at, copy, patterns from, from your assignments and labs that you've seen so far. But yeah, and so part 1 will be due next Tuesday, and then we'll be kind of reviewing those and perhaps deciding what next steps are. But ultimately, part 2 will be released soon after, and that'll be due after spring break. Any questions on this project or anything else we talked about? All right, wonderful. go ahead and start. Again, as Ethan mentioned, all of this stuff is on the portal. Oh, yeah, question. Okay, yeah. Go ahead and start. Check out the portal. All this stuff's on there. You can raise your hand, and we have plenty of TAs that will be roaming around answering questions. And remember that if you have questions and like problems, like that's what your lab groups are for. Feel free to work with each other as well. Great. Go ahead.
Can you have I want to set up a YouTube video. Stop.